The art of the future will be alive, like you and I. Why? Because art has always reflected social change, social, political, philosophical change. Not only reflected change, but also art has always participated in the process of precipitating change. The art of the future will be alive, like you and I. We have always invented new creatures. Humans have always had the need, the desire, the vision, the compulsion to imagine, to conceive imaginary creatures. We know of Greek mythology with the Minotaur, with the Greek chimera. We know of the golem in Jewish tradition. Amazonian folklore, for example, has the Curupira, a protector of the forest. Japan has countless imaginary creatures, ghosts of multiple kinds. And of course, in Germany and Austria, we have Krampus. Well, we have always had the need to imagine these creatures. But now we have the means to produce them. And this precipitates a profound cultural paradigm shift. What does this mean? In what way do we engage with these processes? To ask these questions, but not to ask them remotely, not to ask them as somebody who is simply scared of them, to ask them and ask them in a way to seize the material processes and to change the stories that are told with them and about them. I created in 1997 the term Bioart. Bioart. Bioart names a new field, a new art form that employs molecular biology and biotechnology in general to produce artworks. Artworks that explore life, artworks that change life, artworks that engage with the material processes of life, and also artworks that create new life. My first work was in 1997, was entitled Time Capsule. In this work, I implanted in myself, live on TV and live on the internet, a digital microchip that you see encapsulated in bioglass. I implanted this, as I mentioned, live on TV and on the internet, and I did this surrounded by 7 sepia-tone photographs that my grandparents brought with them from Poland when they immigrated in 1939. But that's not really the point. The point is not necessarily to draw attention to this particular context, because all of us, we all have these types of photographs in our families. So to me, what this image does, because there's no information in the artwork where the images come from, to me what this does is that precipitates a process, a personal process on the part of the viewer of triggering memories, of triggering recollections. So what I wanted to do with this work was to contrast, back in 1997, the idea of analog memory and digital memory. If you consider the fact that analog memory gets externalized in the photograph, but then you look at these images and you internalize them as a process of development of identity and social connection. Now, what happens when the very idea of memory becomes digital? This is a question that I was asking back in '97. And when I implanted this work, what I did was, in a sense, the opposite. First, the memory, the digital memory, became internalized. And then, live on the internet, participants could externalize the content of this microchip. And we, in a sense, especially in this day and age where all privacy is gone, we feel perhaps that the body is the last boundary, is the last limit, is the last space where you feel safe, where you feel a sense of privacy. But when I had people on the internet entering my body, retrieving the content of this digital memory, placing it online automatically, and I felt no sensation of any kind, it became very clear to me that this boundary between us and the environment, the idea that the skin somehow creates a safe demarcation between us and the environment, that was completely gone. I continued to explore this idea, this undoing of the boundaries between the living and the non-living, the local and the remote, the biological and the technological, with another piece which I presented publicly, in fact, for the first time in Austria. This premiered at the Ars Electronica Festival in Linz in 1999, and this artwork is called Genesis. In this work, I took a sentence from the Bible, from the book of Genesis. I translated that to Morse code. I used a code of my own creation to go from the 2 elements of Morse to the 4 bases of genetics. And then, well, I was doing this on the computer screen, right? So I'm typing. I don't have a Bible, and I was just using a word processor. And in some cases, combining Bill Gates with the Bible would be enough to make a critical piece of art. But I wasn't satisfied with that, and I translated, I created this code. It's on the computer screen, and boom. I sent it to a company. I sent via email because it's text. I copy and pasted. I sent to a company that is specialized in the synthesis of DNA. 2 weeks later, I get my vial, and I'm looking at this thing, and the white powder is in there. You could still send white powder in the mail back in the 90s. And so I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like, wow, DNA outside of the body. And it became very clear that all these narratives, that DNA controls everything, that DNA is the book of life, all these narratives, all these metaphors, are ludicrous, because the DNA I was looking at didn't control anything. It was in a little vial. It was outside of the body. So for DNA to mean anything, to do anything, it needs a context, and the context is the body. So I created different bacteria by integrating this synthetic fragment of DNA that encoded a biblical passage in the body of the bacteria. So you see, now we're talking about a living organism, alive like you and I, that contains a extra biological content. There is text that is encoded in a living organism. This bacteria, these dishes, they were placed on top of a UV light box that remote participants could trigger from anywhere in the world through the internet. And when they did that, they changed the content of the encoded text. When I brought this work back from the lab, I analyzed the first result. And then I produced, for example, in this case, an artwork, a laser-etched granite piece that shows the encoding process and the first decoding process. Now, let's step back for a second and reconsider what I just said. I had text on my computer screen. That text went into a living organism, literally alive like you and I, not a metaphor, not allegory, not representation, truly alive, biologically alive like you and I. So the text goes in there. It's altered by participants from all over the world, and then it gets externalized. What am I describing? Input, processing, and output. Something that you do all the time. Some of you might be doing this right now on your phones and computers. And this thing that you do digitally with a machine, very clearly separated from us, living entities over here, machines over there, now you're doing this through a living organism. So clearly, again, the boundaries that so comfortably have separated us from the non-living, the boundaries that have given us a notion of self, that have given us a philosophical foundation that helped us understand what humans truly are, these boundaries become ineffective, not on a speculative sense, not on a theoretical sense, but on a material sense. In the year 2000, I created another piece entitled GFP Bunny. And GFP Bunny was predicated on taking DNA from a jellyfish, which endows the jellyfish with the ability to glow green, taking that information, introducing it in the zygote of a rabbit in the microscope, and then producing a creature that didn't exist before in nature, or in mythology, producing a new creature that was a rabbit with that particular characteristic. So once again, now we are imagining a living being, and we are not just drawing it, not just painting it, not just sculpting it, but bringing that being into the world. Now, when you work with a mammal, and you bring a mammal into the world, and I just want to make sure that we go on record stating that this very ugly wallpaper is not my house. This is the lab where she was born. I was just so excited. Holding her, we took the picture anyway. So, when you create an artwork like this, and to me this picture in a sense represents that, you become very much aware that we're very far from our historical traditions. The multifaceted faces of Picasso don't really help in this case. The burning giraffes of Dali are not really of great use. The splattered paintings of Pollock or the soup cans of Warhol don't really establish a parameter that help me transition into this new area of art. Because the artwork is truly alive. And as an artwork that is truly alive, it demands responsibility. It demands responsibility in the multiple senses of the word. Not only am I responsible for the existence of this creature, but also this creature has to be able to respond. That is, it has to be able to express its needs. It has to have its needs cared for. It has to somehow have its well-being secured. So you see, we're no longer talking about your relationship with an art object. Now we're talking about your relationship with an art subject. And to me, that changed everything. Well, this generated all kinds of debates in the media and in different venues. And some people at the time thought that Alba, her name was Alba, some people thought that Alba was a monster. And I was intrigued by that because I thought that Alba was beautiful. And I wondered, why is it that some people react this way? And then I realized that Alba was different. She, in a sense, embodied otherness. Just like in mythological times, these imaginary creatures were projections of people's hopes and fears. And the reason why people thought that Alba was a monster is because she glowed green. Now, indulge me for a second. Pull up your sleeve, take one hand, and get this hand very close to your arm. Don't touch it. Get, say, 1 millimeter away, as close as you can without touching. Do you feel the warmth? You feel it? Well, that's infrared. You glow. We all glow. And some creatures can see that. Reptiles, for example, like rattlesnakes, or some insects like beetles, they see infrared. And to them, you are this walking, glowing blob of light. They can see that. Now, if Alba was a monster because she glowed, well, what are we? And I continue to explore Bioart in this work called Natural History of the Enigma. Natural History of the Enigma was a piece in which I took a DNA of mine from my red veins, from my blood, and I moved that to the red veins of a flower. In this case, it used to be a petunia. I used to be Eduardo. Now it is Idunia. And Idunia has these red veins. And in the red veins of Idunia, we have my DNA. But it's not just the presence of my DNA. What happens in this work is that Idunia produces my human protein in its red veins. It's exactly the same thing that this DNA fragment used to do in my body, it does in the body of the flower. Therefore, because it is a flower with an animal characteristic, I call it a plantimal. Now, What is at stake here? If you consider this for a second, what I just said. Suppose that you take a motor from a helicopter and you try to splice that into your car. Remove the motor from your car, try to put that helicopter motor in your car. Will it go? Will it run? No. It wasn't designed for that. The wiring is incorrect. All the connections are incorrect. Now, if you take your human DNA and you splice that in a plant, and it works, it does in the body of the plant the same thing that it does in your body, that says to me volumes about how close we truly are to the rest of the community of life. And for this reason, I like to show Edunia by itself in the gallery as it travels around the world, surrounded by humans. Well, humans? Consider this. The Human Genome Project has shown us that we have DNA fragments from viruses and bacteria. Well, what do you call an organism that has DNA from another organism? Transgenic. We have always been transgenic, we just didn't know about it until recently. As it turns out, all of us, we have 10 times more bacterial cells in our body than human cells. We have 10 trillion human cells and 100 trillion bacterial cells. So we're really never alone, and yes, we are indeed a network. We live in symbiosis with our bacteria to the point that some scientists now say that to think about the human genome alone is pointless, because in reality, you, the human, you are actually a combination of human cells and bacterial cells. So it makes more sense to talk about the hologenome in the sense of holography or totality. The genome of a human being is in reality all of the genomes of the bacteria and the human genome itself. And we also have cells from somebody that is not ourselves in our body, in this case, our mother. So scientists call this a microchimerism. So we are transgenic, bipedal, microchimeric, more bacterial than human. And I love to see this strange creature encounter the flower in the context of the exhibition. So to me, I see that the notion of species boundaries and species barriers are fluid. And the idea that we have inherited of this hierarchical, vertical notion of life, well embodied in the image of the tree of life, where humans are always at the top, that is fallacious, and it's time that we change that hierarchical notion of life and we begin to develop new models, that we think perhaps of a spectrum of life, that we think perhaps of a network of life, or perhaps more broadly even, a community of life. Thank you.